Can you solve classism without solving racism first? I would argue no. First, let's define classism. Classism is the prejudice against or in favor of people belonging to a particular social class. With all of the recent events going on with the CEO and Luigi, people are getting fed up. And we're coming to a time where people are realizing that the upper class is just stealing money from us. Completely true. Now, I've seen a lot of people make think pieces on TikTok to say that they just want us to focus on the cultural wars between each other in the working class instead of rich versus poor or rich versus the working class. Yes and no. Yes, I believe that they want us to be divided so we can't be unified in order to start a revolution or an uprising, insurrection, whatever you want to call it. But at the same time, you cannot disregard the true issues that lie inside of the working class as a whole, because the working class consists of a multitude of people and races. And we live in a country, the US, where racism has been perpetuated and institutionalized for so long that it is an ingrained part of our society. Although capitalism is the system in place that gives life to racism, we would ideally need true unity within the working class in order to overcome classism and capitalism. But you cannot do that if you do not address racism as a whole. Let's get some examples. In the 1920s, the women's suffrage movement happened, which is when the 19th Amendment was passed so that women could get the right to vote. Black women made huge strides in paving the way for all women to vote, but they never get the credit in history. They are never celebrated for doing so. It's only white women. After the 19th Amendment was passed, Black women still faced voter suppression. They still faced discrimination from being able to vote. It wasn't until the 1960s when the Voting Rights Act passed when Black women were able to vote freely, and even then, still get suppressed. Where were white people, specifically white women, from the 1920s to the 1960s for 40 years? Where were they to help us? Where were they to help Black women in their struggles and in their obstacles and their right to vote when Black women relentlessly helped them in an effort to help all women? Which leads me to my point. When everyone wants to make these arguments about classism and wants to say that we need a livable wage and that we need universal health care, unless you enact and include Black people in those policies specifically, they do not apply to us because that is how our country is set up. And most people assume that universal health care and all of these umbrella terms include Black people specifically, but Black people will still get discriminated against in those conditions unless you specifically put those policies in place. And what is unfortunate is that research shows that when white people find out that these things apply to Black people, they are less likely to fight for it or desire it. They only want things to benefit them, which is one of the many reasons why we will not have true unity. Especially after this election, Black people are not in the most trusting state of white people in general. I can only speak for myself, obviously, but from what I've seen and what I've gathered, especially on social media, that is Black people's current standpoint. Black people are fearful that if we were to put our neck out on the line, if we were to comply and do the hard work, that at the end of the day, we will be disregarded. We will still face discrimination. Even in socialist countries, Black people still face discrimination. Even though the Ukraine is not a socialist country, when Russia was invading the Ukraine, I saw so many stories of Black people and African people being left to die, being left to be bombed by Russia. The Ukrainians were literally not helping them. They were literally pushing them off of trains, not allowing them to get on. That is blatant racism. And the harsh reality is, Black Americans know that if that were to happen in the US, we know that white Americans would do the same thing to us. More modern example is SZA. In 2019, SZA was in Sephora and she got racially discriminated and harassed. Mind you, SZA was not an aspiring artist at this point. She was pretty well known. For that to happen to her, simply because she's Black, there was no other reason. That sends a message to all Black people that it does not matter how much money you make, what class you're in, you are still going to be discriminated against. And whether you like it or not, Black Americans make up America. We make up the working class as well. Just like we do make up some of the 1% too. And it's a hard conversation, but if you do want true unity, if you want to overcome classism, if you want to overcome capitalism, you have to address everything on the ballot. You have to eliminate racism. There's no way around it. It's going to be impossible to address racism after the fact, after overcoming classism, because Black people are simply not going to give you that option. We're not putting our neck out on the lines just for our heads to be cut off.